Welcome, champions, to the next overview and tier list ranking, featuring the newest champion. This is where we'll break down their mechanics and place them in my overall tier list for every champion in the game. However, they slapped us with both a new champion and the end of Season 5 launching right into Season 6, with the new seasonal reworks. So we've got a bit of a double feature on our hands today. Always remember to check out the timestamps in the description if you're here for something in particular, because I'm going over a load of information today. Before we dive into the season, let's talk about Jang Sao, the true neutral, satyr, druid/wizard, making her home in Seat 8. She serves the group as a support and healer. Her basic attack is just that, pretty basic, grabbing her star in a jar and tossing it at the nearest enemy. It is worth noting, however, that this is a ranged attack, which helps in the ever progression of getting a legit full ranged group to come online. Her ultimate, however, will cause her to transform into her starry form for 15 seconds, during which she will spawn stars, moons, and planets hovering above the battlefield briefly before blasting toward random enemies and dealing one hit of area damage. The amount of hits is equal to her Star Collector's exponent, which we'll cover in a moment. +1, so even when she's at 0, she gets at least one hit. So what is Star Collector? First, we need to cover the Celestial Goat Person's main damage buffing formation ability, the Mysterious Wanderer, where she increases the damage of all champions in the formation who are placed in a slot with 2 or fewer adjacent slots. Just about every formation in the game does have this as an option. I think only Shaka and Warden's events don't, though not all of them are ideal spots for where a lot of your DPS are going to want to be hanging out. Thankfully, for 50,000 gems, you can eventually pick up a feat which will increase this limitation to 3 instead of 2, which massively opens up the viability for positioning this formation ability. Now let's talk about that Star Collector, where each time an enemy is defeated, there is a 1% chance it drops a star. Jang Sao collects these stars and increases the effect of the Mysterious Wanderer by a very low amount, but persisting through resets, stacking additively. Unlike most other persisting through adventure scaling formation abilities, this one does have a hard cap maximum, 4 billion. So if we go back and look at that ultimate, if you happen to farm up to her cap of 4 billion or 4E9, we take that 4E9 and that additional +1 for a maximum of 10 potential hits from her ultimate. Jang Sao further boosts the Mysterious Wanderer with Painter of Beauty, where the effect is increased for each pigment assigned to equipment on currently slotted champions in your formation, stacking multiplicatively. So be sure to keep up with emergence and season quests as they keep coming and going. All of this together makes Mysterious Wanderer become a rather strong buff. Her healing comes from Stellar Nursery, where every 5 seconds she heals the 2 most damaged champions in the formation. This is a simple flat healing that scales to what we've come to expect of healing in the game, so don't expect anything too crazy here. Jang Sao has 2 different specialization choices. The first, a choice in another way to increase Mysterious Wanderer's performance by either scaling off of slotted champions with a wisdom of 13 or higher, or those with a dexterity of 15 or higher. Both options stacking multiplicatively. The choice is very simply whichever your formation has the most of. The second choice is tied to Star Collector. Moon Collector will give a chance for moons to drop off defeated enemies as well as stars, and collecting them will count as 5 stars. This is a great early option for building her up to that 4 billion cap. Star Caller will have her fire 3 more stars from her lantern during her ultimate, and the ultimate's damage debuff is multiplied by the numbers of stars shot out. An excellent choice when you've capped or at least have a higher exponent of Star Caller. And a Night Runner will increase the effect of Star Collector by a percentage equal to the number of stars she has collected in the current run. A great pick if you plan to farm up stars in your current run, and in general, as this is the only option that will directly increase Mysterious Wanderer from these options. Her equipment is good, no flat global damage increases, but 1 for each of her main formation abilities, as well as her Wisdom/Dexterity specialization choice. And finally, ultimate cooldown. She scales well, even if the healing equipment feels a bit cumbersome. Her feats are decent, about everything you'd expect for her formation abilities and all damage, but also that one that makes her Mysterious Wanderer more viable, and another separate damage increase altogether, increasing the damage of all champions by 40% for each pigment applied to Jang Sao, but only stacking additively. Now let's talk about her event, Feast of the Moon, where we have the options of Jang Sao, Virgil, and Whittle. A decent bunch to work with. Jang Sao can reach pretty good buffing numbers, Virgil has some fun mechanics to work around, in my opinion, and can also reach great numbers with some amazing availability. And Whittle is key for enemy spawn speed. Like I always say, full epic everyone you can. And keep in mind it's Whittle's last event before she is retired to only being unlockable through time gates. But if you're questioning who you should focus on, my call is between Jang Sao and Virgil. Whittle doesn't really need big equipment investment to come online for her main role, speed. So it comes down to who you think you would use more in your formation. I personally think Virgil is great, but that's me, and I cannot believe it's been a year since I did that video. So what about her achievement and adventure variants? Her achievement is quite simple, only requiring you to collect 5,000 stars. So either use her frequently or park her somewhere you set up a mass genocidal killing spree. All of the variants force her in your formation, the first not allowing her to be moved or removed, and only the champions in the formation with 2 or fewer adjacent slots can deal damage, which you'll want them in anyway to benefit from Jang Sao's Mysterious Wanderer. The second allows her to be moved but not removed, while restricting your formation based on her specialization choices. You can only use champions with a Wisdom of 13+, or a Dexterity of 15+. Together, that's still quite a few of the champions in the roster available, so this shouldn't give anyone issue. The third also allows you to move her but not remove her, and spawns 2 to 3 Astral Elves with each wave, who don't drop gold or count toward quest progression. But more annoyingly, a Star and Moon fills up a slot in the formation, so you'll have to work around an 8-party formation. Some new players may have to farm up a bit of favor for this one, but still should be easily doable, just slightly more restricting. Her availability is actually pretty bad, only being available for the Strahd Patron and locked out of 3 Trials restrictions: Strength, Constitution, and Charisma. She's no good for Krond as a true neutral with 8 Strength, and shares a seat with Warduke, so can't be used with him either. And another reason her position in Seat 8 is a bit strange is that she's released now with Season 6, which houses a reworked champion in the same seat. She doesn't count for Black Viper's Aura of Infamy. She does count for Potpourri for Ashara, which is great for her as the first Potpourri option in Seat 8. I'm getting a little deja vu. Anyway, I'm going to put her in the middle of B. She can reach good buffing numbers, don't get me wrong, but that's the height of her potential, and it takes a lot of build-up between farming stars and applying pigments. A proper formation with ability scores that match up with her specialization, and even then she's quite restrictive with her positioning before the 50,000 gem feat, availability, and who can even benefit from her. With the new champion covered and tiered, now we've got to dive into the new season, Season 6, Elemental Rebirth. This season focuses on 5 unaffiliated champions with high dexterity scores, who are older champions of the roster. The champions are Sisaspia in Seat 1, Korth in Seat 2, Nrakk in Seat 8, Warden in Seat 11, and Zorbu in Seat 12. Now I'm going to be focusing on their changes, not necessarily what their kits were as a whole, as I've covered those in my seat videos. So if you need a basis of understanding to work with, I recommend checking those out first, but I do not think it's required. Anyway, let's work our way up, seat by seat, and go over the changes to see where there will be any tier adjustments. That leads us to Sisaspia in Seat 1. One of the biggest changes with her out of the gate is that her ability scores have been altered. Her dexterity has been increased by 3 to fit in the theme with the season, but her strength and intelligence have been reduced by 1 in compensation, which thankfully does not knock her out of any patron or trial day 1 viability. Her Halo of Spores has received a lot of minor tweaks, the most important being that she can attach 4 spores to a normal enemy and 10 to a boss, up from 1 and 4 respectively, which directly increases her buffing potential on boss areas now. But it's also been nerfed in that its damage bonus now only scales with the post stack, And considering how low it was to begin with, it brings it way down. Guess it's the price we pay for being able to stack more. Symbiotic Infection and Healing have both been changed to scale off how many spores she has used in the current area instead of her reserve. Before, she used to get weaker the longer you lingered in an area, since her reserve would deplete if enemies were not dying, and now she scales the longer you linger, which isn't a bad trade-off. Infection now also scales at a lesser amount, but multiplicative instead of a flat amount additively, which leads to some higher numbers than before, and makes her increasing her spore maximum all the more important, since the more spores used in an area equals more multiplicative stacks. She gains a whole new formation ability in Dance of the Spores, which increases the maximum reserve of her spores based on the slotted formation's average dexterity score. Also, if the average is 16, and for every point above, it will increase the range of Halo of Spores additively by 12.5%. Think like Strix's Stinky Aura for how Halo's range works. A longer range is nice, but not required, as she can naturally reach an average ranged enemy without increasing it. Her specialization picks are the same, just slightly tweaked. Simple Infection and Fungal Body have received slight buffs. Spreading Spores has been reworded to fit with her current setup, and overall she largely does just work the same, but performs better. I'd had her ranked in the low C, but I do believe these changes in numbers and mechanics brings her up to a B. Next up is Korth in Seed 2, who has definitely been shaken up. He now has a heavy focus on buffing only champions with a high dexterity. His rapid training now both increases the damage and reduces the normal attack cooldown of champions with a dexterity of 16 or higher. You might think this makes him restrictive. However, his old specializations have been thrown out, and he now has a fresh selection, which will directly boost a champion's dexterity, either in the 2 slots behind him, the 2 in front of him, or directly above and below him, straight to 16. And with a feat, he can bring them up to 17. That means you can boost someone like Kron's dexterity right on up there, making him viable for the likes of Sisaspia's Dance of the Spores and Korth's own updated Calculated, which sums up the total dexterity scores of all champions in the formation and increases the effect of rapid training for each point, multiplicatively. His Lizard Folk Tactics has also been reworked as his method of marking enemies, causing them to take more damage from all attacks, which includes click damage. With Group Tactics, he tracks the highest number of enemies he's marked in the current area, and increases the effect of rapid training for a lower amount, stacking multiplicatively for each stack. Unfortunately, Group Tactics does not have an equipment slot, though if it did, we'd be able to skyrocket rapid training's buffing numbers. Strength Before Death will also allow him to save any champion from death, not just himself anymore, granting them invulnerability for 5 seconds and the temporary health from his fighting spirit, and instantly counterattacks with his ultimate against the enemy that landed the potential killing blow. Which, by the way, his ultimate was buffed a little bit, but remains mechanically the same. Overall, he's a lot better. As long as he's marked a few enemies on the battlefield and your formation's dexterity isn't poop, his rapid training will be a pretty decent buff, and he offers a lot of utility besides. I'm rolling him on up to the high B. And now we have the most conflicting of them all, Nrakk in Seat 8. He's been in an interesting spot in the game, unique enough to matter, but still in some desperate need of a little love. But I'm not so sure this love was consensual. To start, he's lost his DPS tag, fully leaning into that support role. Death Strike is gone and his other abilities have been reworked, on top of gaining Way of the Kensei, which is a low to average buff to champions in the columns in front of and behind him. With Keymaster, he will increase the damage of Way of the Kensei based on the maximum number of key points he has accrued at one time during the current adventure, stacking multiplicatively up to 60. The only method of him gaining key points is through his ultimate, which is now highly unique compared to other ultimates. You'll activate his ultimate and see this graphic on his character. You can activate his ultimate again to gain more key points, timing it just right by activating it when the blue, the bottom, reaches the yellow on the top. Now, if you want to just get him to maximum key points without worry of him spending them away, you can cheese this a bit by leveling him to 80 to gain Keymaster and not leveling him past 120 when he learns Stunning Strike, which is his method of spending them. And then make sure you reach that cap before leveling him past 120. If you can get the maximum of 30 by timing it right each ultimate, you can do it once, reset his ult with Dungeon Master, do it again, and you'll be capped for that run. The difference between 0 and 60 is staggering, so you'll want to cap it if you can. His old specialization choices are gone, and has been replaced with his, Githzerai focus. It's now a specialization choice, because he'll choose between Wisdom of 14 or higher, or Dexterity of 16 or higher. Interesting, yes, but don't get too excited, because more changes have come with it for a massive negative. I like the idea of choosing between the two, especially with the current focus on Dexterity, but they have changed it to only affect positionals. And man, that's why it was so good in the first place, is that it wasn't positionally focused. That means all those gold finders you used to buff like Omen, Merylwyn, and Kroll will no longer be buffed by this, at least their gold find, even if you pick the Wisdom focus. Only positionals. Not only that, but the amount it buffs those formation abilities has been nerfed. They even gave it an equipment slot, but that equipment slot has a cap, and even once you reach that cap, it is less than it used to be. And for those who might be paying attention, yes, that means Celise no longer gets buffed up enough to reach 100% of her melee immunity. Even though they tried to make up for it by adding the Dexterity 16+ as an option, I personally view this as a net loss between losing non-positionals and the decrease of the increase. I also wish he maintained his DPS tag, but he really did need to lean either harder into DPS or support, and his support has come online in an interesting way. I just wish they didn't fundamentally shift his focus exclusively into positionals. And if you were using him to boost your gold find with the likes of Omen and Merylwyn, that's no more. And a lot of you who relied on Celise plus Nrakk to set up an Area 2000 Azaka farm, you're gonna have to switch it up to a slowing/pushback setup, but get that in quick before they inevitably nerf that too. Loving old Nrakk's Githzerai focus and lost unique mechanics aside, he's still a solid champion. As a support with a potentially large buff, on top of increasing the output of other champion formation abilities, he's an A. Yes, he's ranked higher than he used to be even though he's lost his unique mechanics, because his numbers can keep up now with the changes and he can be reliably used in a pushing formation. I just wish we didn't have to lose flavor for volume. Now let's move on to Warden in Seed 11, who still revolves around applying hexes to enemies. But a big note here is they are no longer sticky, and where before Hex would additively apply, Hex now increases the damage an enemy takes by 100% multiplicatively, and is then increased by the post multiplier. Naturally, Hex can stack up to 4 times, but with a new feat, you can increase this to 6, which isn't as great as you might think. We're looking at a max flat 6,400%, increased by that post multiplier, in my case, 2e10%, for a 1.3e12 total bonus at max hexes, which is better than it used to be, just nothing crazy. Thirsting Blade is dead, but the new formation ability Accursed Spectre has raised, which will spawn specters on the battlefield when an enemy is killed while afflicted by Hex, and they increase the damage taken by nearby enemies by a lower amount. The old specialization is gone and replaced with a way to scale the maximum number of Accursed Specters that can be active at once, choosing to scale off your formation's slotted evil champions, Dexterity 16+ champions, or those who have Charisma as their highest ability score. This is important because of 2 other new formation abilities. First, Spectre Rush, which makes all active Accursed Specters rush toward the location of Warden's attack, so you can benefit from multiple applications of Accursed Spectre's damage increase, which is multiplicative. So let's say your increase is 1000% and you have 5 active specters, that's going to be like a 1.6 E7 increase total. The second is Cloak of Flies, which make Warden's attacks also deal area damage in a small radius, equal to 25% times the highest number of active hex stacks in the current area, though this extra AoE does not apply hexes itself. Overall, Warden is better both as a buffer and DPS, but it takes some time to build up hexes and requires on-kill mechanics for everything to fully come online. And even then, a lot of the numbers are lower multipliers, though they do add up, all the while losing the traditional, sticky nature of the hex debuff. I think Warden is going to scale on up to high B. Finally, with Zorbu, all they really decided to do here was cause confusion. Many of his abilities work the same, but have been renamed for no real reason other than actually making his character a little less interesting. Lifelong Enemies has become Know Your Enemy, and he no longer tracks Drow, he instead tracks aberrations for that bracket. His favored foe flavor has been implemented here as well, instead of a specialization, which has been removed. The positive of aberration being added is that he can synergize a bit with the absolute adversaries and Imoen. Here's hoping the rest of the Baldur's Gate 3 bunch don't take up Seat 11 or 12, so those two can maintain usefulness with that crew. Also, each stack cap is now equal to the newcomer Jang Sao's cap, capping at 4 billion or 489. I really need to finish that off. Seething Hatred has become Focused Fury, and hasn't changed otherwise. Hunter's Pack doesn't inherently affect Zorbu anymore. He instead obtains it through a secondary passive, Expert Hunter. The purpose of this is to allow Zorbu to still be affected by it if a mechanic like Warduke's Invert changes its positioning. This does matter for how his new specialization choice works, which was Focused Anger, and has now become Hunting Partners, which now counts kills to Know Your Enemy, additionally for each champion in the formation affected by Zorbu's Hunter's Pack, instead of a flat 3. Oh, and his equipment slot for ultimate attack damage has become a second scaling for Hunter's Pack. Interesting. All in all, he is a bit better, but still largely functions the same, both in his numbers and role in the party. I don't see a reason to change his positioning in the tier list at all. Whew. Thanks for dropping in on this girthy boy. Hit that sub, like, and bell. Leave a comment on what you think of this little star thief and this season's champions. Have fun grinding out the new season with slightly less FOMO and working on that new dexterity core. But more important than anything else, have a hell of a time out there, champion.